Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Anxiety Recovery Podcast. I have a very special guest with me today, a returning guest named Dr. Ray Doktor. He's a life and relationship coach. Welcome back to the podcast, Ray.
I'm excited. We've been talking about this for a while, so uh, yeah, we both are passionate about what we're about to talk about.
Yes, and I'll talk about a little bit about more of what we're going to talk about in today's podcast. But for those who maybe this is the first time they're listening to the podcast of my podcast or hearing about you, can you share a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
I'm a life and relationship coach, and with that, I've worked with over 6,000 clients, and most clients I work with uh, will come to me to figure out, how to better their relationships, to look at negative behavior patterns that they have in their life, and so forth. And what comes with that as well is where they might have trouble with using drugs, or they're also an alcoholic and just they're not aware of it yet. And so when I work with people, whether it's in regards to their life or relationship or even career, that I see everything interconnected. And therefore, if they have poor coping mechanisms, in which we're going to talk about, that for sure always bleeds into every area in their life, including with their children and so forth. So that's a little bit about me. I could have shared more, but I know will come up in this conversation. I don't like to talk about myself. Honestly, there's this relief when someone just reads my bio, and sometimes I listen to what like a speaker or a host is sharing, and then it's kind of funny, like I'm so far removed from that description as well. So.
You're like, I'm just me in this earth, just trying to share wisdom.
Well, okay, I have a doctorate in clinical psychology and a master's in counseling psychology. So if we're trying to like someone's listening to this or watching this and they're like trying to see whether or not I'm educated or not, or there you go. But you know what? There's a lot of people who have PhDs and they don't talk that way.
I agree.
So,
I agree. I think so much of, you know, quote unquote, how smart you are. A lot of it also has to do with the life experience. And you
mhm.
just have such a wealth of knowledge and experience. And today, Dr. Ray and I are going to be diving deep on addiction, its impacts on families, boundaries, and some of the misconceptions that can arise from that. Because Ray and I both have had different experiences with addiction, whether it's with our clients, um, personal, etc. So, just to start out, what are some of the most common misconceptions that people may have about addiction that maybe some family members and loved ones might hold around addiction that can make it worse ultimately?
Well, some of those is first off, of course, I don't have a problem. They believe others are exaggerating. Uh, they also feel like it's their free will, which is truth, but they're not aware of how that impacts others. They go into defensiveness, and uh, they feel like they need to defend themselves and might say that you're not perfect either. Uh, and or they think that what that person's going through or is an isolated moment, such as, they're dealing with this in a negative way, their father passed away or something like that.
Mhm.
But those are some kind of misconceptions. The main one that happens when a person's not really ready to change is that if there's even that openness to have a conversation, it's always I can figure it out on my own. I could do it on
Yes.
my own. And it usually always goes to more moderation versus just uh, stopping completely. And in that, I have rarely seen success from that because there's one foot in and one foot out. And so even if they're, say, sober for a month and then they just party that one weekend, I mean, they go nuts and then they regress right away. Or they seem to be bitter and unhappy with how they're feeling. And this is not to judge those who stand in front of those buildings where they have AA meetings, but I think we can agree that you'll notice that they drink a lot of coffee, they're smoking cigarettes, and kind of they're basically changing one addiction to another, cigarettes and coffee. So the addiction is still there. It's no longer with alcohol or drugs. And you'll notice that most people are in survival. They are in survival. And that's a key thing to remember. This person is not taking this because they want to hurt their family. They're not taking this because they're consciously aware of how they impact others. They're in a way in pain. And so therefore they're using or drinking so they can sedate that, so they can forget for a while who they are, or there's this belief it gives him or her some type of confidence.
Mm, absolutely. And I also with people, like that's the key statement. It's like you're in survival. And if you're listening to this, when you're in survival, like really deep into it, it's hard to even think about anything other than your struggles, other than what you're going through, other than yourself. So for someone who's struggling with some sort of addiction, it could, like, they don't even think about you, not because there's anything wrong with you or that they don't love you. It's just because they're entrenched in
Hmm.
their own pain. And I think that's really interesting about you mentioning, it's never really went well when people are like, I can figure it out on my own. And it's like the denial there. It's like that's also protecting them from feeling the pain of once I put this substance or toxic trauma bonded relationship or my porn addiction, whatever it is, to the side, what's going to come up underneath that?
Hmm. I worked with a couple over the summertime, and this was a referral um, of someone else I worked with, and it was the only reason why I said yes. Otherwise,
Mm,
I didn't believe the husband was ready. And what ended up happening was that he did say exactly that. He's a high functioning alcoholic. He said that he like primarily uses a certain time, but he makes sure that like the kids are not around and so forth. And he was admitting he still does cocaine. Um, and what's interesting is just without him saying anything, I could see inflammation in his face. When he would talk, I could hear a lot of uh, incoherency. And uh, even the wife was somewhat enabling. And we took a break because he even flaked on our session. And she reported to me about a month after that, like she has thrown in the towel. He was passed out in the house. Her and her kids were locked out. He could not wake up. It was pretty bad. And that's what it took. But here's the thing. He still hasn't gone to treatment. This is 2 months ago. So what happens when people are in this is that you never know what rock bottom is for them. You don't know. And that's what it takes sometimes. So for a sober person or a person who has gone through the experience, him or herself, you might be thinking like, what are you not getting? Can't you see that you've said this 3 times? Can't you see it's been a year where you've been kind of saying the same thing? But when they're in survival, they don't hear you. In fact, they'll get defensive because that drug or whatever is like their mistress they're hanging on to get them through life. And most clients, if they have an addiction or they bring up that they drink a lot, I'll ask how much, and then if if they're seeing me after like it, they got in trouble, they got a DUI, something like that. That doesn't mean they're ready. I'll ask if you didn't get in trouble, would you still be drinking? If they say yes, it's like okay,
mm,
you're just doing this because your wife is going to leave you, but it's not sustainable. You're going to be bitter, angry, and then I'm going to be the person who didn't say help you because you couldn't help yourself. You weren't ready. So I'll ask this simple question from 1 to 10, 1 meaning that you're truly ready to stop drinking or using. Where are you? And if they are, if 1 meaning that they're not really into it, 10 that they are. If like if they're not closer to 7, typically they're still in it. They're still partying, and so they might not be ready. And hands down, almost every time I've been right. including with the husband, because when I asked the question, he said, "Well, I have a good time with it. I use it. I used to do it. Oh, I do it at Burning Man. I do it at festivals." And I said, "But how much do you actually do it per month?" He said, "Like maybe every other weekend." And I was thinking to myself, I said, "So you do it over the weekend for a couple of days, then you're coming down. So basically, technically, like you have something really in your system for 8 days out of the month." So, and it led to him passing out and so forth. So it's a tricky, it's a sensitive topic.
Mm. Yeah, it's so scary. And it's like even and I guess I'll share this from a personal standpoint. One of my best friends, I had to cut off probably, yeah, it was in September
Mhm.
because all year he was really struggling with a weed addiction. And people tell me frequently, you can't get addicted to weed, blah, blah, blah. You can. You
Yes, you can.
absolutely can.
Mhm.
Absolutely. It has the capacity to be addictive. And it got to a point where at one point he was sober for 6 months, and like kind of like you said, it's like, oh, they have this one night. He was like, it's my birthday, I'm gonna do it, like it'll be fine. And in my head, when he told me he was going to do it, I was like, such a bad idea. And it just got to a point where he would forget to message me for weeks at a time. He would miss really important things, and
Mhm.
it stops you from being emotionally available to others. Obviously, because you're in pain yourself, that's why you're using or partaking in some sort of addiction. And sometimes I will still like I'll think about him every day. And I left the door open of okay, when or if you get help, then we can be friends again, but I just can't do it. And that was for me a time when I had to put my fixer part to rest
Mm.
because it's just not helpful for anyone in that circumstance.
I want to speak to what you just said, but also it could connect to like some of the interventions I've done with family members to get their loved one into treatment. You said that unless you get help, then it's going to be hard to be in a friendship with you. Some people can hear this and go, "Wow, that's very conditional," or they can hear that and go, "Wow, like if you are a friend, blah blah blah." And what I want to share is this: people who sometimes stay in a relationship with an addict or alcoholic, even though they keep crossing boundaries in a subtle way, they're enabling them. If a man or a woman is getting all the benefits from life by still using, acting like a jerk, not being accountable, then there might not be motivators for them to change. So by people having firm boundaries, such as yourself, Valerie, you're not communicating this from a place of uh, being conditional. You're coming from a place in which you recognize that you have strong boundaries. He's missing important things with you, whether he was an addict or not. If it was any other friend, also, you might say, this doesn't feel good. And if we're going to engage in a deep friendship, we need to be authentic and transparent. And so this gaslighting, this disappearing, this not following up with your commitments is not working for me. Therefore, we can see each other here and there. I'll take in small doses. What you're saying, Valerie, and what I'm trying to share with others too, is that when a person starts using or drinking, that they can show up with a lot of narcissistic traits. They can show up in ways where you can keep making excuses for them, and it doesn't feel good, and it's not an authentic connection. It's just more like, I'm going to tolerate this because I'm a people pleaser, I feel guilty,
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. And that is
Mm-hmm.
actually the energy oftentimes that keeps a person using and so forth, such as when we do interventions, and I haven't done one in over freaking 15, 18 years, is that you connect to family members and friends. And the key thing that I share with them is this: you have to have strong boundaries. They're going to maybe get defensive and argue with you, They're going to take it personally, even though that you're not blaming them. And even if they come from an I statement, such as, I'm afraid that you're not going to make it home. I worry more than you realize. I love you, John, so much. It's really hard for me to engage in a relationship with you because I can feel your pain. I can feel your pain. And they are to stay firm with how they feel about this alcoholic or addict. Because when they have that experience in an intervention, they finally hear from maybe 3 to 5 people, even though it's not their intentions to hurt family members or friends. It's not just one person saying it, it's 3 to 5 people saying, this is how you're showing up, even as a controlled alcoholic. This is how you're showing up, even though you do cocaine every other weekend. This is how you show up, and we don't say things to you, but our children are really worried. And when you're not home, they've said, is daddy gonna come home? So they need to hear that. And whether they change or not, this is something that's always been positive. It changes the relationships forever. And what I mean by that is sometimes it plants a seed, so eventually they become sober. Um, Sometimes it ends friendships. I'll be honest. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
and yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned all those points of like, listen, Valerie's coming from a place of strong boundaries, and what can keep people in that is if they still have those same benefits to you, what would like they need, what would be the purpose of them to change? And like, other friends of his just would like enable it. They would do it with him, all these things, and would just pretend, and he would, and towards the end he was like, well, what if we once a week talk and we have that commitment and we just don't talk about the addiction and like what I'm going through, but like it's not authentic anymore.
Mhm.
I'm not even able to connect with you how I was able to in the first place, which is why we became friends in the first place, because he was in a
Mhm.
healing profession. And so he had to like stop his business and he got a job and he just kind of disappeared from all of these different things. And it's like, yeah, I'm just not willing to be friends with someone who's not willing to take accountability
Mhm.
and not willing to do the healing work because that's important to me. And so, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. And it's like, at first, I just had so much guilt around it, but it's like, no, like, this is my strong boundary. If, like, this just isn't okay with me anymore.
So for clarity, are you saying that this is actually a practitioner, a person who's doing healing work?
Not anymore. At least
Mhm.
he's not doing it anymore, at least full time, but he was. And I
Did
would
he
tell
stop
him,
because that he was struggling with, uh, is he using drugs or both drugs and alcohol?
I don't think he's into like alcohol really, more weed. It was
Okay.
more that, but he couldn't stop really this addiction. And that was his whole thing, is like, I know all the tools, I can give it up whenever I
Hmm.
want, but he really couldn't.
Hmm.
But getting to your question, he stopped because he knew it was not an integrity. And I was like, you can't be seeing clients if
Hmm.
you're in this. Like, that is completely not an integrity. And that's also what really made me want to stop being friends with him, because that's just not okay. Like, everyone struggles, everyone's going through something, but if you're a practitioner or in this healing role, it is your duty to work on your stuff so that you can show up for your clients and have the
Hmm.
capacity for that and do your own work as well.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. This is a digression, but I saw a post on Facebook in this group, and the woman was talking about how uh, she doesn't feel all mentally there at this hospital, and it's not necessarily the work for her, and she felt incompetent, and she said, "Does anyone have any suggestions?" And the one comment that got more likes was this: remove yourself immediately because you cannot hold the space for the patients there. Do that as a service to them. And there's plenty
Mm-hmm.
of people out there who want a job who are ready and are centered to do it. And so I just want to piggyback with you like on that. And I really appreciate your accountability for that. But what's interesting too is this: if he went to school for this long, like say even 2 to 4 years, which is not that long, but he's it was a serious career choice, and he couldn't complete it because of weed. That's a huge fucking problem. That's a huge problem. Bottom line. Doesn't matter.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter if we can, qualify it as not as bad because, yes, I agree, weed is not as bad as alcohol. But if you can't control yourself from doing something that alters your consciousness and it is your kind of way to maybe get out of pain, um, then like it has control over you. Bottom
Hmm.
line, if you don't want to call it an addiction, you can just say that it's in this area, I'm out of control. In this area of my life, I'm out of control.
Hmm. Yeah, 100%. And it's like, it's painful to look at that, to look at those things about yourself. Like, what am I running away from?
Hmm.
Because clearly you just haven't built up the emotional and nervous system capacity to hold your pain.
Hmm.
But it's just important. And bringing back to, I want you, like, what are some other ways that you've seen, like, with your clients, that they might enable the person who has an addiction? Maybe it's family
Well,
members, a partner.
well, I mentioned to you before we had this conversation because you were curious of my experience with working with people who were in addictions. And I shared with you a story which I remembered, and that was where I was working with the survivor of this relationship, a woman, and her boyfriend slit his wrist in the bathtub. And so he had been struggling for even, I think, a decade. And he was not able to, say, keep his job. He moved in with her. So here she thought she was doing a favor for him. They love each other. So he moves into her apartment. Um, it's clear that other family members knows that he had this addiction. The girlfriend, who was my client, was even had a good relationship with his sister, and the sister said that he'd always like been a troubled individual. So you
Mm-hmm.
have a troubled individual who uses. So I work with clients most of the time where they just have troubles and they're not coming
Mm-hmm.
to me for the addiction. But typically what you have now is you have a unhealed trauma and then it's covered with alcohol. So you need to work with both. And what ended up happening is that he, in an uncanny way, she was a little bit suspicious of it. Like he kind of love bombed her this specific night and telling her how he appreciates her, but he was actually contemplating on what he was going to do next. So when they fell asleep, he evidently didn't go to sleep, and that's when he went into the late hours, maybe 3, 4 a.m., and killed himself in the bathroom. So she woke up to go to the bathroom, and here her boyfriend was in the bath dead. So imagine that. And so here you can see that as if she, by letting him move in with her because he couldn't keep his shit together, as a form of enabling. Some people would say, but I love him. I love him.
Mm-hmm.
What else am I going to do? Bringing it back to you, Valerie. I love you so much, I know I'm enabling you. I love you so much that I am going to say this, and I know it might end the friendship. I love you so much that I'm willing to allow you to get defensive and triggered. To not only do I love you, I want to demonstrate how I love myself and my boundaries, and therefore I can't allow this in my life because I have to stay sober, both figuratively and literally speaking, for my clients because I hold space for troubled individuals just like you. I hold space and I don't have the capacity to do this for you. And I'm sharing this specifically this way, Valerie, because it's this. So when I started this work, I had to get clear with friend, client, because when I first started this work, I started giving a lot of advice, free advice to friends. And I didn't know why I felt so heavy. It was because I was possibly a great listener, good at problem solving. So why not get free coaching? But then I learned that, wait a minute, this is for people who are really ready to do the work. And most of my friends who were asking me for free advice, all they wanted was lip service anyway. They weren't ready to put in the work.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that. And, that's important. The only way that we can help others is by us being able to feel love within ourselves, that we're able to uh, see the bigger picture of this person, even if, say, they are in pain, and not judge them, but maybe look at their coping strategies and help them cope with life a little bit better. But if we're entangled in toxic relationships, it's really hard to see sometimes.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's really important to take like a bird's eye view to it because when we were talking, even if we tried not talk about the addiction, all areas of his life were impacted and we couldn't
Mhm.
really talk in the same way that we were. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, how awful
Yeah.
like that experience and that example was of your client. Like I
Mhm.
can't imagine that. And it's like, yeah, you have to love yourself more than appeasing them and trying to get rid of tension because you're afraid of losing them. But
Yeah.
it's not doing either of you a service to stay in a relationship like that because it just make things worse. And even after I was sad and like I miss him, but and I told my friend and she was like, well, why don't you just accept him? And it's like, I can accept all I want, but I have to accept and love from a distance because
Yes.
I'm just not going to do that. And, like, what are some ways that you can help people that, maybe they have cut people off of their life that have some sort of addiction or some type of internal struggle that's keeping them entangled in something and they struggle with the guilt after that or guilt of no contact, like what advice would you tell that person or if someone was your client?
Well, first off, when I'm going to talk about the client I worked with who, after her boyfriend killed himself, what she went through, because that would be a great segue into this question you asked me. So,
Mm-hmm.
what came up for her was guilt, like she should have known the signs. But everyone saw the signs for the last 10 to 15 years. Like,
Mm-hmm.
meaning it was clear they had a problem. So, however, what ends up happening is that we get so fixated on how it can impact, say, our relationship, to how it could um, maybe even impact something that we benefit from. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so when Sharon, with a person who's being challenged, you have to arrive to a place where you love this person so unconditionally and yourself, you're willing to risk everything for the sake of love. You're willing to risk this, even the friendship, knowing that you might save a life. And not only will you save a life, that others who he's impacting will feel better, and eventually that this person will get his act together. So it's almost like you have to be able to detach yourself from the benefits you get from being in a relationship with a family member or friend. And what this means is that a lot of times people don't have that conversation with that person in a way because they're making it about themselves. How is this going to impact me? How is this going to impact my relationship? How is this going to impact me collecting money? How is this going to impact me and my well-being? Listen to that me. When sharing that from that unconditional space from that person who's struggling, it has to be about them. And the only thing that you can own will be this. I am afraid that you'll get the fence over. I'm afraid you're going to die. I'm afraid that your kids are going to end up with a fatherless, end up fatherless. That's it. but you're not blaming him or her.
Mhm.
You're not telling them that that's what's going to happen. You're just
Mhm.
being raw and authentic and just saying, this is what I own. I get afraid. You're right. You're drinking problem. I feel this. I feel this. I feel that. And that's about all you have control over. And that's it.
Mhm. Absolutely. That really it's all that is all you have control over is how you feel and how you communicate to this person. And even you were talking about like the benefits from that person and someone who's codependent, like I mean, a part of me is like afraid to say this because this is so real, but like what are you gaining from being in a relationship with someone like that? Is
Mhm.
their addiction a way to distract yourself from your own pain? You fixing them, trying to fix them, trying to rescue them. That's usually coming from an inner child wound of yours that you're something you yourself are trying to run away from.
Amazing. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And don't be afraid to say that, that there's truth in that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll add to that. Um, a person who is in addiction, sometimes in their sober moments, they're very charming. So I get that. And so we see their potentiality and we focus on that potentiality. And we maybe even unconsciously create a pros and cons list. And there's a lot more pros. But
Mhm.
with an addict or an alcoholic, that let's just say that 2% that they blow it or they're high or whatever, that can impact so much in their life, such as in with your friends in your friend's life, him smoking weed, he maybe justify it in some shape or form, and that he
Mhm.
does it late at night, or it's not like he's driving, but if his career path was impacted in a very detrimental way, it wiped out a big part of his purpose.
Mhm.
That's pretty big. And so these little things, like let's just say it's not like 5 sticks of dynamite that can just blow up a big house. You might go, well, it's only an M80, it's only a little firecracker. Well, hold a little firecracker in your hand, light it, and see what happens. Oh my God, you might still blow off a finger. It's going to really hurt. It's going to do some damage. And so when we're waiting for someone's potentiality, what ends up happening is that, again, what we brought up earlier, him or her is still going to probably experience all the benefits. So why would they want to work on this shadow or this addiction?
Yes, absolutely. It's like if you're still giving someone the benefits, why would they step up? It's not going to cause that pain and internal discomfort because sometimes you have to go deeper than you ever thought possible of your rock bottom to
Hmm.
like wake you the F up. And going back to the aspect that you discussed was their potential. And it's like you see them if you know someone struggling with an addiction, you see them for their potential, right? And because maybe you remember them as their charming self, their sober self, you see that side of them, but their potential that you're seeing, this big potential that you're seeing, is a projection of what you would believe about yourself. That has nothing to do with them or their actual potential, if you really want to look at it.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, if someone is grieving the loss of a loved one due to an addiction, what advice would you tell them to help process that loss and really move forward from that?
Was that a question? Was that a question in there?
Yeah, yeah. Like, how would what if someone is grieving the loss of someone due to an addiction? What advice would you give to that person who's experiencing that loss and like how to move forward?
Well, what's interesting in that experience, because when people mention the word loss, that oftentimes they're disconnected from source already, that they have already forgotten of their own path because they've been distracted with trying to get their partner sober. And so when their partner actually leaves, there's this kind of like bigger, I would say, emptiness. Because imagine this. Let's just say that you never dated really healthy people. In fact, that what you grew up with is a mother who stayed in bed and she was depressed, or you grew up with a father who, he would drink sometimes, and your mother would take you with her to drive to the bar and pick him up. By the way, yes, all this shit has happened. I've worked with clients like this. And so
Mm.
your your first, I guess, experience with a relationship is fixing people, fixing one of your parents. So how are you to know better?
Yes.
Okay. So that it's first to recognize that maybe you don't have a healthy love map to relationships. And it's more that you were raised to be a fixer or a rescuer. So there's that. Well, what ends up happening in that type of codependent relationship is that the partner, the friend, is distracted and doing everything to get this person sober. But while she or he is doing this, they're not going into the gym, they're not doing yoga, they're not seeing their own therapist, and they lose themselves. And
Mm.
what's keeping them distracted from to actually keep functioning is this what they say is this bigger problem. Fred is needs to get sober. He's going to lose his job, and that's going to impact his family. And then if say Fred goes completely like you have to either disconnect from him or he commits suicide or it just doesn't work out. When you no longer have that distraction, there you are with yourself that you've been neglecting to love.
Mm.
And so that is why I'll see often with people who are they're like a big part of their life and relationship was being a caregiver. When that person finally dies or leaves or whatever, they're like there's this bigger hole in them because they've disconnected from God, from source.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's no longer just about Fred. For Fred, for example, it's no longer just about Fred and his addiction.
Mhm.
It's this relationship ultimately is illuminating where you're neglecting yourself. And you're probably so triggered by the fact that they're an addict because you're also an addict in your own way. Because codependency is an addiction.
Yeah.
And adding to your point of your love map, it's like you being the rescuer. And that was definitely my role. And that's why I was super proud of myself for being like, no, this is my boundary because I would try and fix and give advice. And I'm like, no, I'm done with that. I'm not doing that anymore because it's like, I refuse to put myself last. I refuse to do that. And a lot of people have an unconscious like conditional love with it for themselves, so they try and prove themselves through being needed. That was exactly my parents blueprint. My dad has multiple sclerosis and he's a narcissist, and my mom is the fawner people pleaser. She gets her worth from being needed because he always has some sort of crisis. And it's like, yeah, can you be honest with yourself of this is also a secondary benefit of this is
Hmm.
what I'm getting from this dynamic.
Yes, you're sharing the hidden secondary gains to not do your own work. You're
Mm-hmm.
all yeah, it's by the way, I love having these conversations with you because where you took it was great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
it's an interesting conversation because we all like you mentioned about codependency is can be considered an addiction also.
Mm-hmm.
So what Valerie is saying is this. If your emotions have control over them, or you have like the tendency to create dynamics where it continues to make you sad or angry, you might have an addiction to even that emotion, that neurochemical response. You might somehow unconsciously create dynamics because that's how you're used to feeling. And we're not saying it's your fault. However, if you're used to arguing, I guarantee this, and I've been in relationships with women like this, to even clients. It's where
Mm-hmm.
they grew up in a home where there was always chaos and yelling, and that when it was quiet in our home or wherever we were, sure enough, within a short period of time, we would end up getting an argument. Something would be wrong, something petty. And so I learned, like, wait a minute, this is why I started learning about self-sabotaging. and
Mm-hmm.
how a person might feel uncomfortable actually feeling good. A person might feel
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable in that space of ease because they grew up in a home where there's domestic violence. And the way that looks, that cycle is typically, let's just say the explosion, he hits someone, he yells at someone, then the remorse, he says he's sorry, then a honeymoon again. And that's a space where we feel like, okay, everything's great again. We say, I'm sorry, I love you. Then we start feeling the tension again. And because it's happened many times where there's the tension, eventually the victim will instigate the argument or the fight because the tension and the unknown when it's going to happen again becomes greater than just let things be. And you'll see this loop.
Yeah, that's huge. And that's something that not enough people talk about is that cycle. And with domestic violence, narcissistic abuse,
Mhm.
and and then in adulthood, this looks like now you have coping mechanisms of overworking. This could be like distractions, always looking at Netflix. That's your own addictions because you're so addicted to those feelings. Like
Mhm.
the stress is very addicting. The
Yeah,
cortisol, the adrenaline, it's so
yeah. Mm.
ridiculously addictive. And so it's like my clients who are really I shared this in my podcast I recorded today, a different one.
Mhm.
um my previous podcast, we talked about building your capacity to be with boredom because, for
Mhm.
example, in my home there was always chaos, right? Yelling. And so in adulthood it was very uncomfortable to sit with boredom and
Yeah.
not have that overstimulation. So it's like, can you start with even just 1 minute of letting yourself sit in boredom without distractions?
Yes. I'm working on it still with both of my sons. And what I mean
Mm-hmm.
by is this, for example, if we're watching a movie together, I'll see them sometimes grab a Rubik's Cube and I'll take it away. I'm like, I want you to do just one thing. So they sometimes can be very fidgety. To My son is really good. He's very independent. Like I have a stepson where he can sit in that space by himself. Whereas I noticed with other children, including my girlfriend's son, that he I guess in this town, I know it's everywhere, but here it's more prevalent where I see both parents, but primarily the mother will fill in those spaces. "Oh, is there something you want to do? How are you feeling? Like they want to make sure that their son or daughter is always feeling good. And you've
Mm-hmm.
seen my posts. You hear I talk about Max. I'm like, no. I said, what's different about the older generation is that we didn't have phones. We had to discover like nature outside. We had to sit sometimes with boredom. We had to sit with things. We had to create. So don't keep giving him or her stuff because then that's what they're going to need always. And when they get older, and let's say that they're exposed to weed or something else, they might take that and like, wow, this is better than sitting with my emotions. Wow, uh, this helps me stop worrying because I'm too high now, and so forth. We want children to feel deprivation sometimes. We want them to move through pain. We want them to move through the experience of just nothingness, just nothingness.
Hmm. That's really important. And that's really interesting because that is a really good point about like women and mothers. They're like, oh, how are you feeling? Like they're trying to fill the space. But it's like, no, please let your child be bored. Like when I was a case manager years ago and I would work with children. And I remember there was a child and he was addicted to like horror movies on YouTube. And these like, I remember the mom was like, this is horrifying. And it's like, these kids like in this generation, they're so like it's easy to become addicted to like your tablet. And it's like we need to let them sit in their
Mhm.
stuff.
I am addicted to Facebook. I didn't
Oh, I feel
realize it.
that. I get that. I like
Yeah.
I have to literally stop myself many times.
Yes, and I'm no longer facilitating this group with 100,000 people. I'm not going to go down that story, but it was just always kind of negative stuff. The way the man was running it was out of
Mm-hmm.
not in integrity, but I would get these notifications, and what it was is that when I would see the red dot, it created this kind of dopamine rush of like me wanting to check it. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm walking around my house with my family going, I need someone to like me. I have low, low confidence, so someone please like my post so I can be validated one more time. It wasn't that at all. It was more like the chemicals of my own body, my nervous system was, gravitating toward this thing, this shiny thing going off. But this is what I learned, Valerie. It wasn't just that, because that would mean that, like, yeah, you could ask me, call me out and go, so are you saying that your phone has a greater impact on you, that it has control over you? I would answer it this way. It only does when I'm not present in my body. It only does when I'm not doing more of the things I enjoy. So I notice that when I'm sick, I will check my phone more. I notice that if I'm not feeling emotionally good, I check my phone more. That's when I realize, oh, this is just like going to the refrigerator and pulling out food and eating it when I'm not even fucking hungry. So,
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
yeah.
Absolutely. I completely get where you're coming from. It's not even about, oh, I need someone to validate me or whatever. It's literally just like the screens in the phone, they're chemically addictive in itself, but it's like, yeah, when I'm not present in my body, that's when I will check it. And I was even talking to a friend yesterday about dating apps
Mhm.
because I personally was noticing I got off of the dating apps because I'm single, whatever. It just didn't feel good anymore, and I just
Hear that,
it
guys? She's single. So if you're high quality, you're doing inner work, she might be available. Okay, sorry.
That's so funny. I love that. That's so funny. Yeah, and I was like, this doesn't feel good. And I just started to become repulsed by the actual dating apps. But when I would go on it, a lot of the time it wasn't because I was present in my body, I felt good. It was just because I was disconnected from myself or I wanted a distraction from whatever I was feeling. And so I'm like, well, this isn't really an integrity with me. I don't want to continue doing it. And a friend of mine literally said the same thing. She's like, yeah, I don't actually go on the dating apps because I'm like intentional and mindful. It's because I usually feel like disconnected from myself. And it's like, absolutely. And it's like, that's the key here. It's like, notice when you are going into these addictive cycles with your phone, or it could be the alcohol or drugs or dating apps. And so what would you say? Like, how can people really reclaim their lives and identity and emotional health after someone's really been consumed by another person's addiction or their own addiction?
It's baby steps, and it's reclaiming yourself, such as questions like this. I'm going to make it up, but we can always promote my book, which
Yes.
all it takes is one, drop your one big hidden belief and master your life, which is why I wrote the book, to help people who can't afford coaching or want to understand the structure of consciousness. Questions like this. Why did I truly stay in this relationship if I was in a lot of pain? What were the benefits? Write that out. Uh, what did I hope would happen for him or her that I really wanted to benefit me? Um, while I was paying attention to him or her, were there parts of myself I was distracted from or ignoring, consciously or unconsciously? Another question. Um, if this person is no longer in my life, uh, what can I do with my time now? Uh, now, or if they're in it, if this person were to leave my life, uh, what am I really afraid of to do and to show up, you know, uh, as far as the new version of myself? Questions like that, because when we're holding space for an addict or an alcoholic, we lose so much of ourselves and we think we're doing God's work. And the thing is, God, yes, we are to be in service to others, but we're still also here to serve ourselves so we can be clear and more open and make sure that our support for another person is coming from authenticity rather than codependency.
Mm, that is a powerful statement, powerful questions. is this coming from my authenticity or is this coming from my codependency? Yes. Yes, absolutely. I think that is so, so powerful. And if you're still in this relationship, adding on to what Ray said, think about, would I want my son or daughter to be in a relationship exactly like mine? If I wasn't in love with this person, would I be friends with them? Would my higher self date this person or be friends with this person?
Mhm.
Really
And
sitting
all,
in that.
here's the big one too, and I piggyback off of this. If I let this person go, can I still keep him or her in my heart? Because you're not cutting off the person, you're just changing the form of the relationship so you can better serve him or her where they have to finally call a therapist and rather than call you every day. Um, it's also going to allow yourself to recover so you can give more, so you can
Mm-hmm.
contribute more.
Mm-hmm.
I believe we're all stewards of this new earth and generations to come. And that if we've been supporting a person in their addiction and they're not helping themselves, then we have to ask ourselves, am I really helping by doing it this way? Am I really helping?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I love that. And I think that's so reflective. And it's like really coming back to, I know everyone talks about, oh, like serving others and being of service, but people who are anxiously attached, for example, or insecurely attached, it's like they're giving too much power to them. Bring it back to you, babes.
Yes.
Back to you, please. Like you need to put more on yourself, not less, like less time and energy and attention on yourself. Yeah, so I just think that is fabulous. And so anyone who is struggling maybe with themselves with an addiction or they're witnessing someone going through an addiction that's close to them, is there any last advice you would tell them?
Did you say if they're going through their addiction?
Yeah, it could be they're going through an addiction or they're witnessing someone close to them having an addiction or experiencing an addiction.
Well, two things. It's remember that it's not who the person is, it's not who you are. It's a strategy to cope with something. That's it. What are you trying to cope with? And can you cope with it in a healthier way? And if you come up with excuses like, I can't do it because of this, I'm afraid of that, those are the shadows. Those are the shadows that's keeping the addiction in place. So it's just really looking at the strategies. You don't have to label the person as an addict or yourself as an addict. If you're if this is sparking something in you, there's some connection to this. And you don't need to say that you're an addict or an alcoholic, but you could admit and say this, the way that I'm using this, the way that I'm approaching this is creating problems in my life. That's it. It's creating problems in my life. Why would I create problems in my life if I really love myself? Oh, maybe I'm using because I don't really love myself. Maybe I'm hanging on or trying to support this person because I don't know better and I don't love myself. And so all of these questions, everything we're saying, it comes back to the self. What's in it for me? Am I truly being authentic? What am I really afraid of? How could life be if this person was sober or I was sober?
Mm, so fire. I hope everyone listening to that actually journaled and like wrote some of this down of what Ray said because everything that he's saying is pure facts, like pure fire. Like that was so amazing. So
Thank you.
amazing. And where can people find you or connect with you?
The best way just is going to my website, which you'll have a link wherever you put
Yes.
it below. Oh, everyone always says below. Um, and that is RAYDOKTOR.com, raydoctor.com. And also my book is on Amazon. If you put up Ray Doctor, my name, also my book, All It Takes Is One, will come up. And those are the best ways to find me. And of course, you can put in my name in YouTube and TikTok, it'll come up as well. But I'll leave you with that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast again, Ray. It was such an
Thank you.
honor.
Thank you so much.